A report in 2013, which documented these extrajudicial executions. And soon after the report was put together, the government of Bangladesh instituted a case against him. This case has dragged on for 10 years. In the course of these 10 years, Odikar's international funding has been reduced because their licenses have been revoked. They weren't able to get domestic funding, but the people in Odikar continued their work. Last year, their license was cancelled, and a few days ago, their leaders have been put into prison. So this is the reality of civic space around the world. When you speak truth to power, when you uncover corruption, when you uncover serious human rights violations, those who are seeking economic and social and political transformation in our societies are facing the brunt of civic space restrictions. Now, we fought long and hard in Agenda 2030 to ensure the inclusion of civic space. I dare say the MDGs were a lopsided set of goals. They didn't have any political underpinnings. And we fought really hard to ensure that we have commitments on the freedoms of fundamental freedoms in goal 16.7 on access to information and fundamental freedoms. We have commitments in goal 16.10 on access to information and fundamental freedoms, goal 16.7 on representative, inclusive, and participatory decision making, and in goal 17.17 on civil society partnerships. These together support the edifice of civic space. But 7 years on, after Agenda 2030 is established, according to our research at Civicus, through the Civicus Monitor, which is a participatory platform to measure civic freedoms around the world, and many of our partners also here, including Biliana, 85% of the world's population live in countries where the core civic freedoms of peaceful assembly, association, and expression are being restricted severely. This in itself is a travesty of justice in the year when we are going to be celebrating 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The top violations that we've seen across the world are harassment and intimidation of activists and journalists to prevent them from carrying out their human rights work. We've seen restrictive laws to prevent mobilizations, to prevent the right to peaceful assembly, through which decolonization has been achieved, through which struggles for gender justice have been advanced, through which young people are continuing to demand climate action. And that remains a huge challenge. And then we also find a number of restrictive laws have been introduced around the world to prevent organizations from being formed, to prevent the independence of civil society organizations. Moreover, we are seeing around the world a toxic mix of authoritarianism and populism around the world. We heard about a little bit earlier about how there's been a spate of coups in West Africa, which contains a huge bunch of civic space challenges in those countries, that civil society that seeks democratic values, that seeks equality in those societies is going to be pushed back. But the arc of civic space restrictions is very wide, from the military dictatorship in Myanmar to the terrorist regime that has taken power in Afghanistan and is preventing women and girls from getting an education, to restrictive regime in Nicaragua, which is imprisoning human rights defenders en masse around the world. And this means a huge challenge. But I also want to raise two big challenges that are happening by two very powerful countries on civic space. One is this notion of development with national characteristics, which China is continuing to push forward. When Agenda 2030 was established in 2015, it was a universal agenda. It was an agenda where we realized that all the goals depend on each other for their fulfillment. Yet we have this notion of some goals are more important than others, and every country is going to pursue its own development path. And that remains a huge, huge challenge of this notion of how come the universality of Agenda 2030 is now being questioned, including through cultural relativism, which is another issue that the Russian government is continuing to push forward on how the human rights framework should be interpreted according to cultural norms in that country. And that remains a huge, huge challenge. Now, I've of course outlined some of the challenges that exist with civic space, and we've heard within the declaration also about how non-state actors, anti-rights groups, and certain criminal private enterprises are also reducing civic space. But we have made some progress as civil society across the world. In 2020, a call to action on human rights was put together by the United UN Secretary General. This call to action talks about the link between civic space and Agenda 2030. Unfortunately, 3 years after this call has been put together, we find that civic-based restrictions have actually increased, not reduced. So here we are calling on the UN to actually carry out an audit on how well this call to action has been implemented across the board. Very happy Alexandra is also here. And also the High Commissioner for Human Rights put in place a civic-based guidance that talks about participation, promotion, and protection of civic space across the board. And that call to action also, we are urging that the UN carry out an audit to what are the impediments to the implementation of this guidance on civic space. Now, civil society organizations are continuing to mobilize. Despite setbacks in many, many countries, we have seen more recently in Brazil, where civil society organizing led to the defeat of a far-right movement in that country. We've seen the same in Spain, where there's been defeat. We've also seen advances in gender justice through mobilization and on women's sexual and reproductive rights in many parts of the world. And courts remain a very important ally of civil society in ensuring that there's more civic space. For instance, in Rwanda, a court acquitted 3 journalists recently, but who had been detained for 4 years. So it was too late. So that just shows the reality of some of the civic space challenges that we continue to face. I know in the interest of time, I'm not going to take any more time now, but there's going to be calls for an SDG stimulus plan over the next few days. The Secretary General is calling for $500 billion to be annually freed up. An SDG stimulus plan without any guarantees of civic space and civil society participation is only going to strengthen repressive state apparatuses. It's only going to strengthen networks of patronage. So we must demand that the SDG stimulus plan must be accompanied by civic space guarantees by governments and through ensuring that democratic institutions that protect and promote civic space are strengthened alongside the implementation of this SDG stimulus plan to achieve all the SDGs. Thank you very much. Give him a real clap. He's helped us with framing this globally. So, Onesmo, now you are going to give us a very quick snapshot of the region that you work in. I know you work within Tanzania, but also within the African region around issues related to human rights defenders. So in your sense, what do you see emerging, especially around human rights defenders and civic space in the region? Thank you. First of all, I should appreciate what my colleague has. Oh, no? Yes, I should appreciate what my colleague, yeah, it seems to be not louder. Yes, now my colleague has just given a very good snapshot of what exactly it is when it comes to civic space. And now, sometime as civil society and human rights defenders, when we talk about civic space, actually we focus more on the 3 indicators, the first 3 indicators. Actually, talking about the civic space, we have 5 indicators. One which is very common, and sometimes we don't speak about it, is about integration and inclusion, in how civil societies are made part of all the processes that we have in our countries, that we have in our continent, the value that we are given as civil society in all the projects and development that we plan within our countries at continental level and at the global level. We are only talking about our freedom to speak. We are only talking about our freedom to associate, but we don't talk about our freedom to be integrated, our freedom and the right to be valued as key partners within our framework, development framework. How many of you are always invited to speak about development projects in our country? And then whatever kind of contribution we give is valued. This is very key, and we don't speak about, we only find the spaces about where we can speak, where we can criticize, and where we can associate as we are sitting right now here. This is something that we actually in Africa, we look. Civil societies are not valued. Civil societies are not treated as allies or best friends, or we call it partners in development. We are speaking about goal 16. We are speaking about goal 17. We are talking about building institutions. Civil societies are key actors when it comes to implementation of SDG goals. But where are we placed? This is the key challenge. We are not there. We are nowhere to be seen. Even this plan that is actually planned allocated for SDG goals. If I can ask you, those who are coming, if you have received any cent, actually no one will stand and say that we have received SDG grant. That goes down to civil society. And that's but we don't yet we don't speak about that. Civic space is about financial. It's about financial space as well. That we have financial spaces as in society, in Africa, in America, in Asia, in Europe, to equally participate in various development projects. This is a problem we have in Africa, that majority of civil society, local civil society in Africa, don't access grants, not only in SDG goals, but in general framework where we operate as civil society. This is one that I wanted also to share because I know it cuts across all over, because it's one of the factors that affect the spaces for civil society. It's one of the factors that affect our ability to equally participate and contribute to the goals of 2013, 2050 SDG goals. If we cannot equally participate, we are not equally funded, supported internally, going to have an ecosystem. Now, the question of restrictions, now let me come back. Freedom to associate and freedom to assemble. This is a problematic all over. The background, as I provided, that we are not valued, we are not seen as partners, actually affect now our spaces to associate, our spaces to expressly take concerns of issues in our continent. For example, some of the NGO laws in Africa, it's like we are copying from each other. Look at what happened, for example, in Zimbabwe, what is happening in Niger, what is happening in South Africa, what is happening in Ethiopia, in Uganda, Tanzania, and other countries. We are actually using some of the, we are now using laws actually to squeeze the spaces of civil society to equally participate on issues of public concern, and most importantly, to address issues of human rights. This is where civil society are quite active in human rights issues are the ones that most suffering in our continent. If you are very active and vibrant, addressing issues of human rights, making our government accountable on issues of human rights, they end up using some of the laws, for example, just to register or creating some of the laws and regulations that can also squeeze you financially. Now we have some of the financial laws, coming out under the name of money laundering and, FATF framework. But yes, the FATF framework is a good idea. But sometimes this FATF framework, the FATF, the guidelines on how civil society, especially recommendation 8 on money laundering and financing terrorism, that's a good idea that we should fight that. But sometimes this framework has been used against civil society. In Uganda, I remember what happened to some of the civil society when Uganda was approaching elections in some of the countries. So this is what is happening to our civil society. That's the legal framework that we have in Africa. It's like we are copying from one country to another. If one country has successfully used the law and the policy to suppress the civic space of civil society, the other country will come and learn and take that advantage from the other country. But we don't have the solidarity now as civil society to come together and address and fight back those challenges that we have in place. But most importantly, as of now, of course, the issues of arrest of human rights defenders who are frontline is also coming across. It's always there. When you go to western part of Africa, southern part of Africa, central, east, we have a number of cases where human rights defenders or head of civil society have been arrested. Sometimes even issues of disappearance and some area, some key records of killing has been happening in the continent. This is simply because our voices are sometimes feared by those in power. When you are critically standing against any sort of violation, the ultimate result that comes to you is either disappearance, being arrested, your organization being registered, or sometimes it happens sometimes. This is very common, though in some countries we have some progress where we see where we have a certain kind of political top leadership that understand the role of civil society, that understand the issues of human rights. You find the situation is taking somehow taking a better direction. But when you have a top leader who is not aware, who actually has no any knowledge about the role of civil society or is totally against human rights, then at the end of the day, civil society and human rights defenders in that particular locality have to face all the challenges that actually my colleagues have just explained here. I think because we are running out of time, maybe we can have some time to add more on the real situation that is happening in Africa in general. Thank you very much, Onesmo. Onesmo should have mentioned that under the previous regime in Tanzania, how long were you closed? For a long time. Our accounts were frozen for 8 months. We didn't have accounts open, but it's now thriving under the new regime. Actually, say that our new regime. Okay, I'm not. Very. Let's not start a new presentation. Thank you very much, Onesmo. I just wanted to keep in because we raised some interesting issues. Independent actors as civil society, the issue of financing. Would love to see about local fundraising and philanthropy and how that can help us expand our space, the laws, and all that. So thank you very much. I think our next speaker, and I hope I have we are trying to try and, but our next speaker will now be Diana. Diana comes from a region that is also unique in its own way. It sits next to Europe, and Europe has a way of doing many things to it. But Diana, I won't make the presentation for you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Richard. And indeed, usually, I mean, not usually, the Balkans is part of the European region. However, we actually face quite a lot of challenges when it comes to the civic space in all across the region. And while on paper and theoretically, the legislation is there that's supposed to provide protection and all laws supposed to provide for free and enabling environment for the civil society, in practice, this is not the case. What is most concerning is that there is a very negative trend going on, which is especially frightening now, with very significant developments going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this is a region which is very closely interconnected, and negative trends especially very easily spill over from one country to another. So this last year was Serbia, which we were looking for as something out of the box in terms of a negative trend going on. Bosnia this year has surpassed our expectations by all. So because I think this is very important to be treated as an experience on one hand, and on the other hand, because we are actually not seeing any as we used to from the international community or from the European Union. And mainly this is driven by geopolitical reasons and factors affecting, especially this time. So what is happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina is that there are both negative developments in terms of legislation. Two exceptionally restrictive laws have been drafted. One was amended. What was actually adopted, which is about the freedom of expression, and actually reintroducing criminalization of defamation. Was actually the leader in the region to criminalize this. So now introducing again criminalization back. The international community reacted, all of it. However, apparently they seem resilient on the international side. Clarify, this is only in one part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, in the Republika Srpska, which is one of the entities of the federation. The other thing is draft law that is approved by the government, but is still not voted. It's about the Foreign Agents Act. So the law is very, very similar to the Russian law on foreign influence, and if it comes into effect, it will actually heavily restrict the work of organizations, including all of the organizations, especially of those organizations working on human rights, democracy issues, which are exclusively foreign funded by foreign donors. So access to funding is restricted, those organizations will die, actually. Actually, while the international community has been somewhat critical on this law, and especially high concerns have come from the UN institutions, the President of the Republic of Turkey claims that the law is very much similar to the foreign agent act of the U.S. law on foreign agents. So while proclaiming that it has no connection whatsoever to the Russian influence, which is quite prominent. The other concerning thing is that the heavy attacks on LGBTQI activists in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also across the region, which previously was fairly inclusive and respectful of this movement. So until last year, actually, no reported attacks have been going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina, while in this year, March actually ended with physical violent attacks on the activists and vandalization of their property. When these things tend to develop, Bosnia is particularly curious because of the very high presence of the international community. There is still a special envoy, with the president actually threatened that it will be banned and expelled. Because of the comments made in public on particular issues. But other than that, the EU, the US, the international institutions are not enough critical. And this is all across the region because it mostly is connected to the war in Ukraine and fear that before the human rights and democracy issues, and especially before the freedoms of civil society engaged. And this is actually very scary path to go through when we prioritize geopolitics over everything else on one hand, and on the other hand, it gives quite a power of the local national authorities to be served because they're not sufficiently pressured by the international community. So when it comes to what you already mentioned, just a short intro about the involvement, it has been a case that depending on which government has been in power, civil society organizations have been more or less consulted. This is we are experiencing a downward trend on this aspect as well. So there are more and more just formal speaking about consultations being organized, and another trend which is very prominent, supported or created organizations are invited just to claim legitimacy about the consultative process. The third and final very trend which I wanted to share is the rise of strategic lawsuits against public participations. These are the famous flaps happening across Europe, actually, where critical voices and civil society activists, especially environmental activists, are trying to be silenced down or closed down by lawsuits by private companies. And this is severely affecting their ability actually to be involved, to contribute to the policy decision-making process, or to contribute at all in the public fora. So this is for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brianna, for again giving us some really interesting insights around these laws on foreign agents. At some point, this has been an issue, and it's very, very similar to many places. The LGBTI activists and how they are suffering. I have a long story that I would tell in this room, but I will not go into it. Issues around stability versus human rights, especially with the war that is happening in the region, and also the laws that society agents and all. I think those are interesting sides. We will now move on with the rest of the panel. As you can see, I'm giving 4 minutes. So I hope you have realized that I haven't been shouting, but I've been shouting with my eyes to everybody who is speaking. So our next presenter will certainly do the same thing. And Zia, I know you have been doing this thing for a long time. So 4 minutes is a long time for you. But give us a few ideas to take home around what's happening in the region. Very much indeed for inviting me for this session. I think there are uh, okay, three fundamental challenges that we have observed, particularly for our region. The foremost one is the rise of fundamentalist and security states in the region. And this is something which is like giving spaces to the more structural and systemic kind of challenges concerning civic rights and spaces in the country, in the region. Be it India, be it Pakistan, be it Bangladesh, Nepal, and other countries in Asia. So this is something which is very, very important that we need to think about. The second thing is that globally, actually, and because of that, the rise of security states, they are actually taking everything with the security lens. And therefore, they are making regulatory framework to control every voice of dissent, every voice that is challenging the state and the authorities. And hence, we have that civic rights and spaces challenges. And you might know that we have this foreign contribution regulatory acts in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, everywhere. And they are actually implementing those with a great authority. What we have witnessed is that since these laws have been have come to the surface, the global civil society organizations have left the spaces. Only in my country, in 2018, 2019, 19 civil society INGOs left the country, and those were the organizations who were for the human rights, fundamental freedoms, freedom of association. They left the country and they never looked back. They even did not dare to support the local civil society organizations remotely. So you see the power of these security states that they even did not allow the global civil society. But my concern is that why global civil society is not actually addressing those challenges and why they are not dealing with security states. With this sport, we are there. The local civil societies are looking towards them, but actually paying attention. One. The second thing is that because of this challenge, the local civil society has also transformed themselves. Some of them, they have been actually observing the self-censorship. Some of them, like rather many of them, have transformed themselves into a humanitarian action organizations, services delivery or services delivery organizations, which are very dear to the state. They don't want the local civil society talking about the civic spaces and human rights. The second thing is that there are certain global instruments, and most of you must have heard about, I said about SATF and GSP plus. These are the instruments which are being used, in fact, by our security states to silence the voices of civil society organizations. Because the organizations are talking about the human rights, the civic rights, and these instruments having certain, frameworks as well as the indicators, which actually need to be shared with the global community. The states don't like that we should be sharing such instances of human rights violations with the global community. But at the same time, the global community is not coming up with the rightful spaces. I will give you two examples. In my country, European Union, I'm very open in sharing all these things. The European Union launched this multi-indicated program for 2021-2027, and they had the three priorities. The topmost for us, we are an agriculture economy. The topmost priority was green inclusive growth. Fine, we love that. And we want that our farmers and our communities and the women should get empowerment and they should get, spaces and finances through the international community. Fine. The second priority was human capital. Developing human capital means giving skills to the young people because we have 65% young people in my country, Pakistan. So they are investing a lot on that, but they are developing their skills, making them labor workforce. And the third priority was governance and accountability and civic rights and spaces. So, in that countdown, the third priority is governance, accountability, human rights, civic rights, and this is not only the case. When it comes to the financial resources for all these three priorities, the 65% of the financial resources would go to the green inclusive growth, and that would also be working through the government. 17% would be going to the human capital and only 9% for this governance and human rights and civic space. So these are the priorities of the global north and the states in the global north. So my question is that why we are being, facing such challenges of financial restrictions. The funds are not reaching up to the civic rights and spaces organizations in the global south. So this is something very, very important to be highlighted through our assembly. Want me to wrap up? Okay. So this is one thing. Second thing that I usually talk about, that UN has given us two major instruments since its inception. One is UDHR and the second one, this SDGs. But at the same time, the states who have committed that they will be taking care of fundamental rights, freedom of expression, civic rights, human rights, the states are not adhering to those commitments under UDHR as well as under the SDG. So we will be failing in the SDG, and it's very loud and clear that we have already failed, as the Secretary General Antonio yesterday said that we are only 15% on track. So I believe until and unless we have these civic rights and spaces for all, equal rights and spaces for all, we will not be able to achieve those global instruments launched by the United Nations. Thank you.
Zia, thank you very much for raising some very interesting and very deep insights around the rise of security states, Ingo's leaving, not Ingo's, but international NGOs leaving, and leaving the local NGOs on their own, the issues around transforming into nice, safe spaces, becoming service delivery, EU and its privatization. Thank you very much for all and a lot more that you have said. So, Rosario, again, you have your 4 minutes of fame, and the mic is in front of you. Let's hear what the millennials have to say. We used to be millennials ourselves, but we can't remember how long ago.
Thank you very much. And I guess it's important that in these spaces that we are gathering now, we understand the importance of human rights. The Janitary agenda is based on human rights, and that is it. Human rights are not interdependent, they are not separate, not a different agenda. And we have to decide if we want to achieve or we want to work on the progress, if there is not a strict protection of human rights, then we are not achieving and we are not going anywhere. And I think something that is important as well is at this right moment, we are seeing a narrative where human rights are threatened. And how do we see it? In different parts of the world. We have people limiting people to speak. We have in regions and countries some women and girls prohibited to be educated, to go to school and learn. We are sitting in other spaces, and even I'm sharing this from my country, from Peru. There is a movement that wants to take us out of our international court of human rights. So that means that whenever a human rights violation happens in Peru and the government, the structure of the government is not adequate because, you know, sometimes there are the perpetrators, we are not going to have anywhere to denounce this. And I guess these kind of situations are the situations that we need to be aware. There is a very big narrative to contrast human rights, and we need to speak out. There is no moment right now to think on, perhaps I'm working only on this matter. We are talking about climate change. If you work on climate change, that is a human right, you know? And if we don't work on human rights, and they are all together. If we don't work on human rights, then we are not going to be able to achieve the protection of our planet, because this is about people's human rights. But if we don't protect our planet, we are not going to have people in some years and human rights to defend. That is the simple thing. So basically, I think it's important for us to understand that in this moment, we really need to speak out. We really need to work and advocate for every single state, either at the national, regional, local level, that is working on the as a cross-cutting approach, human rights, and the language of human rights is included on every single of these decision making that are being taken around the world. Another thing that I wanted to share is that we are right now on the midterm review of the 2030 agenda. We are here not just because it's as a normal year. This year, we are reviewing the progress of how the SDGs have advanced in the last 4 years. So, as was mentioned before, we are on track only 15% on this agenda that was supposed to be the most ambitious, the one focusing on people and the planet. We have 10 years already, and we have only advanced 15%. There is money for wars, there is money for corruption, and there is money to keep enriching people, but there is no to implement this agenda and protect the human rights of every single of the people on this planet, but also the rights of the earth. So I think those are things that we really need to start thinking on, but also in this space, if you have a chance to engage at some point in any conversation, we are in this midterm review, we need to advocate for human rights. It doesn't matter what agenda you're following. It doesn't matter what you are doing. Another thing that I want to bring to the table is the approach of the intergenerational components in this. I'm a millennial, I'm from the millennial movement, but I'm not necessarily the youngest one in this room and either on this negotiation. I was the younger one some time ago, but not necessarily right now. And, but when we see the human rights violations all over the world, taking the biggest impact sometimes in this, of these different situations and crises are young people. If there is political distress, if there is things happening or human rights violations, it's the young people who go into the streets and demanding the changes. And most of the time, those are the people who get incarcerated and who get the trials and who are neglected of their human rights. And this has a bigger deal to women, young women and girls. So I think that if we want to keep working on this agenda of human rights and we want to work on the SDGs, we need to work with an intergenerational approach. We need to engage the younger generation, but they don't engage in that narrative that is contrary to human rights. We need young people, children, adolescents to understand the importance of human rights for the causes they are advocating for. And it doesn't matter the political orientation. Finally, and with this, I close this. We need to work on our regional, what is happening at the regional level. And in Latin America, we have a tool that is called the Escazú Agreement. It's the first agreement on the world that focuses on the protection of environmental defenders' human rights. And I'm not saying that, oh, this will apply on the region too, but demand for something like that in the region. Because those kids who are fighting and striking, those kids are getting in trouble for all of us. And we need to protect their rights. In Peru, last week, before this assembly, like 2 days ago, because today was Sunday, so 2-3 days ago, the government asked to remove the UN representatives because they had a statement about the critical situation because the interdependence of power, the judiciary, and also the executive power is right now in a bad situation. And the UN has a statement. And the Congress of Peru requested the removal. This is not a simple situation, you know, not something we really need our eyes open. Finally, this is the website of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. I will send perhaps the link and to share it with you. We have a tool that we have developed for young people that explains what are human rights, how to defend them, but also if you want to go deeper and get on the political reviews, to engage on that process. Because that's what we need to do, and we need to have our space to raise our voices. So thank you.
Rosario, thank you very much for the insights you have shared. Let the microphone keep moving until it reaches Alexandra. She has now the undesirable task of ensuring that you bring all this together and tell us how the UN is sort of processing some of these voices. She has given us some very interesting things around how everything is about human rights, why we need to speak out. You know, it was very interesting that somebody who was the president in Africa, when they threw him out, he started saying, make some noise, make some noise. And, you know, we all laughed and said, honestly, you first get thrown out of State House and you say, make some noise. So I hope we can make some noise before we get out of the UN. But also you talked about young people and how that is an important agenda as well as HRDs on environment. Alexandra, let's hear what you have to do. We want to get out of here with some comfort. So hopefully it will come from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is a tall order. I will try and do my best in the 4 minutes that I have. But first of all, let me thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel. UN Human Rights Office is very keen to engage in discussions such as this, also to understand how we can best support and reinforce the advocacy that is happening. But I want to start by acknowledging, of course, that civil society actors are critical to promoting and protecting human rights. You have been critical in helping ensure that human rights are part of the SDGs, that we understand, and I hope we share this understanding, and it has been mentioned today, that we will not achieve the 2030 agenda unless actions in human rights. And I agree with the point that was being made by one of the panelists, that civil society is often not adequately acknowledged as an implementing partner in the 2030 agenda, not just a watchdog or someone that raises issues, but delivery is actually happening so much in so many cases through civil society. But civil society is not only defending human rights, civil society actors themselves need increasingly so protection from violations. And this is where we are trying our best. And I will try and make it as positive and as practical as well as I can, because we do see worldwide threats are increasing, and there is a whole continuum of threats that are being faced, from exclusion to vilification, from undue restrictions in law policy, in tactics of criminalization, threats, and violence that happen, and perhaps that hasn't been mentioned yet, not only in real life, but also online. And that is important to keep in mind as we develop solutions and try to work on that. And these threats happen not just for sort of, let's say, the general work civil society is doing, but also for cooperation with the United Nations. So I will try to speak to these 2 points, what civil society can do and how we can help ensure that cooperation with the United Nations is as safe as it can be, and then a more general point on protecting and promoting the rights of human rights defenders themselves. I would just remind that, of course, the UN Human Rights Office carries the main responsibility and the mandate for human rights within the UN, but it is in fact the entire UN system that also has an obligation to uphold and promote human rights, to uphold and safeguard civic space. And Mandeep has mentioned the UN guidance note on civic space that was issued in 2020. And that is, I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, it's readily available online. That can be a valuable tool that you can also use to demand that the UN protect in your countries or at any other level to protect and safeguard and do more for safeguarding civic space. Now, on intimidation and reprisals that are being faced for cooperation with the United Nations, and I wanted to start with that because we have a big meeting happening, but we know that participating in or contributing to UN meetings and processes can also put people at risk. And that is something that we take very seriously. As of 2016, the Secretary General has designated an official that is in charge of this work for the entire human rights system. And that is the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, Ilse Browns-Harris. And she is leading the work on behalf of the UN system to ensure promotion and protection of human rights defenders who are facing threats, reprisals, intimidation for contributing to the work of the UN. Part of that work is general overall advocacy. Part of it is an annual report of the Secretary General that has specific cases, country cases of intimidation and reprisals and recommendations on how they be resolved and addressed. It also analyzes trends. Now, I want to say that that report can only be as meaningful and as strong as the information that we receive. So I would also encourage you to reach out to our office. We have a dedicated team that is working on this. They can be reached through an email that is ohchr-reprisals@un.org. Everything that is sent through this email is treated with the highest levels of confidentiality. Nothing is done or undertaken without explicit consent and approval from the party sending. So if you know someone who has experienced reprisals for cooperation with the UN, or you are that person, please be in touch and let's see how we can work on that. Now, the special, more broader point in terms of the UN system and the promotion and protection of human rights defenders overall. And again, I'll make 2 distinctions. There is work of our office itself, and then there is the work we support of the mandates that are specifically or explicitly very important to human rights defenders. We have heard that we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We had dedicated the entire month of May to civic space and flagging how important it is. The High Commissioner has made and has continued making strong statements expressing alarm at the increasingly deteriorating situation and shrinking civic space. There have been a lot of statements, also country statements that I would encourage you to read. But ultimately, we have a team within the HCHR based in Geneva who is working on civic space. There is a weekly newsletter that you can sign on to. They work on policy, they provide capacity building, and of course, advocacy. And also when our High Commissioner goes on country missions, we make it a point that he always meets with civil society representatives, independently in a separate room with no one else present. So we have and can understand the situation as it really is on the ground and advocate accordingly. Second sort of venue is, and I would specifically like to talk about special procedures mandate holders. We support the work of special rapporteurs that are focusing on freedom of association and assembly, that focus on freedom of expression, of opinion and expression, as well as human rights defenders themselves. they can be a tremendously valuable ally in this work to our office, but also to you as human rights defenders. So I really encourage you, if you're not yet familiar, please go. Information is readily available online. But one thing I would like to specifically flag today is you can find online also a map, a visual representation, and a collection of all the communications that have been sent to governments, to businesses, to owners of social media enterprises that have been sent by this mandate since 2010. And if you take a look at that, you will see that these mandates are very busy, increasingly so, sadly. And since 2010, almost 4,000 communications have been made on specific cases. And you can find all of them online. I would encourage you to check out what has been done on your country. And if you see something, a critical issue that has not been addressed, please be in touch. Lastly, and just to bring it to the, I can see your eyes screaming at me. I will just bring it to the country level. In many of the countries, you will have UN country teams that are working. And I just want to remind you, and you can perhaps help us remind them as well, so that engaging civil society in the work country teams, in their planning and in the evaluation of how well they're doing. So integrating civil society voices in that is not optional, it's actually mandatory, but we do not see it happening as often as we can. So I would encourage you to use the tools that we have that you can provide to also have a discussion with the UN country teams to understand when they're planning when they're starting their next planning cycle, to make sure that civic space is on the agenda and that they are committed to working with and resourcing those who work on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The UN is our host in this meeting, so we have to treat it well. Thank you very much for your comments. I will not summarize them. All the time for speaking for the plenary has been taken by the people on this table. So blame them here. My role is now to use the last 5 minutes that I have 10 people. So that means you have 30 seconds to speak. If you go over, I don't have a way of turning off the mic, but I'm going to try to do that. Dodell, you grab the mic after 30 seconds. Go fast, and then he will go second. Do you have on the chat, somebody on the chat will speak after. Let's start. You will speak for the chatting people. So summarize all the chats in 30 seconds. Go ahead, please.
Hello. One of the things that I think it's important to kind of like recall, because it's important.
Yeah.
Okay, now
like a DJ, like this.
Is that we're celebrating 75 years of human rights, and we're having all these events, and everybody totally forgot about the Escazú Agreement. The Escazú Agreement is an agreement for Latin America through regional agreement, access to information, access to participation, and access to justice on environmental issues. But it's also the one that gives shape to the term human rights and environmental defenders. Before that, we were defenders, but we didn't have that context that it does have. And in 2022, we already had over 100 activists and defenders that have been killed, 80% of which came from Latin America. So why is this important to start putting pressure and start seeking international solidarity? Because it's not only Latin Americans that are fighting against each other or for resources. Those resources that the people on the ground are fighting for, they're doing this globally. And it's a lot of transnational corporations which come from Asia, which come from North America, which come from Europe, that are set on Latin America under colonial models that have been working for the last 500 years and extracting many of the natural resources. So that's why it's important that we all put an eye on it, because we are all related and connected to this problem. And I think it becomes a tool that we should all use. It's not only for Latin America, it's based on Principle 10 of the Declaration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please follow her cues. She tried to make one point very well. So if you make 3 points, I won't agree. Highly politically incorrect for myself. Creating space for civil society simply means no more money to make more noise. That money is not in Europe, in America, and even in Africa. For me, for sustainable development goals to be implemented, it's an issue of national policy. National policy that will recognize the various stakeholders. There is absolutely no reason why a senator in Nigeria will earn a salary higher than the president of the United States. Why a parliamentarian DRC will go home every month with $21,000. But how do we do it? We need to make noise there. Grants are debt. After that told us. Every grant you get is a debt. And that's why you owe explanation and account and report to those who fund you. And you'll be considered as an enemy to your government. We need to find solutions and start looking inward. I have done 35 years this work. I think, Alexander, help UN. UN should monitor and demand that every country, while giving a report, should include the policy, national policy that is inclusive. And that when they report, all the various stakeholders should access national resources. That's my point. Thank you very much. Very well made. Who else is hand is up? Yes, there's one. Are there any other people on this side? 1, 2. Yes, there are 2 people on this side. Go ahead.
Thank
You
you.
have 30 seconds start, and then the online person will end.
My point is in relation to the human rights violations that are taking place. You find that more especially in the global south, these countries or these governments that are violating the human rights are being funded by these inter-developmental partners. When now, whenever there is any human rights violation, the only thing developmental partners who are funding this government is only statement, no action. Few days after the noises died down, you see them contribute, giving more money to the government. We've seen that in the thing of Scotland, where a human rights died sometime last year, who was killed. But what we've seen a lot of statements coming across the globe, but thereafter, no funds has been supporting this government. Where now? Governments are using that developmental money to do some services for the people and using the government coffers to fund the suppression of the people on the ground. That is the challenge that we are facing. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, there is something called classified expenditure in many places that goes to very specific places. There are 2 hands here. One was her here. I think she was the first one. Then, yes, she was the first, then you are the second.
Hello, I feel a little bad taking up this space, but just to say, we have a virtual reality film that none of you should miss. It's an exceptional
global South leadership in vaccine equity, and it transports you in an immersive experience from Brazil and the Amazon to South Africa, to Senegal, and to India. So please, when you have a minute in the next 2 days, we'll be outside. Please come and watch our film. And I'm sorry if I took the wrong moment to do this.
No. It was a breath of fresh air, so we shall take it as that.
Thank you so much for getting the chance to sound it. I'm saying just one thing in perspective of Bangladesh, actually, that we have been saying last 2 days before, Adil Rahman was one of the international human rights activists. He is the chief of Odikar. He has been, he got sentenced from this court only for expression of his opinion. So this is why why we have been such situation. These only for 3 things is liability, liable for this reason. Because of that, one is political violence, another is social injustice, and safe and constitutional democratic difficulties of constitutional democratic systems. Because of that, when we have been seeing the violation of human rights, this is in my country, I mean Asian perspectives, 80% is liability is the political violence. On the basis of political violence, the human rights has been violated in everyone. Even though the president of South Asian Rights for himself, Advocate Dr. Saxena, he is also victimized by the police department. development. So we cannot, it's a daily economy for our Asian country. So that this is the with the Rosario and others distinguished speaker. This is the high time to sustainable political system and sustainable justice system as well.
Thank you very, very much. Well, I think we have finished all our speakers. Over to you, Matt, on our online discussion. One more. After Matt, start summarizing it in 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a few comments online. First is a request for the tools that OHCHR has to be shared, I guess, with if we can have written URL.
Targeted. This requires sort of suggestions of one environment because civilian leadership very much.
Yeah. Hello everyone, I'm Gina Romero from the Latin American and Caribbean Network for Democracy. I just want to make a very brief comment about the rights movement, especially and that is very complicated to actually fight those anti-rights movements because sometimes like civil society, talk like the civil society are not in America, many of the official and unofficial scenarios for participation are completely take also our it's a big
continuing. This discussion has been on for a long time, and the reason is because we know that without civic space, without engaging on human rights, we will not do any other thing meaningfully. So to do anything meaningfully, we have to sort out this problem. But unfortunately, people like you who have worked for the last 3 decades on this agenda are still working, and we are still seeing a lot of pushback. But let's see what else can be done. Now, to close it off, Major here, Vitalis from Kenya, where they do safaris, is going to summarize in less than 3 minutes everything we that you have said. And if you misses anything, please don't mind. There is lunch at the back. You remind each other what he has missed. So Major, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm not sure I can summarize all this interesting discussion, but I'll maybe just speak on what I had that can contribute to this. And I think the fact is that civic space knows no boundaries. That both those countries that call themselves rich and those that consider themselves poor indeed do violate this space. And I think all the examples that are presented really articulate that. The question around the issue of legal frameworks that are restrictive, the issue around political space, where we've seen political space being violated everywhere. And here I think this is where Mandip and I usually argue, whether it's the legal, whether it's the politicians who are misbehaving. and I think you have heard from Africa and the schools, the political space defining how civic space is being manifested. And I think that is
We need to think through the second. And I think the point you raised around ownership. And here you're talking about democratic ownership, where governments indeed have to provide a space, institutional framework through which citizens can engage and be stakeholders in development planning, in monitoring, in evaluation. I think that is very clear. And that too is a space that we haven't developed much. We focus too much on the legal restrictions and stuff. But I think if there is a process for inclusion in policy formulation, in airing our views, that maybe other elements can also be described. And I think also the other element, and I think here, this is the gap that we normally feel, that if maybe others feel that donors or rich countries are more friendly to civil society. And I think the case of Pakistan, the case of India, the case of the Balkans, where the geopolitics play a big role, where the securitization of state and the policies, all of them being securitized, really also have an implication on how civic space plays out. Because depending on how, whichever side of the government this this policy is taking place, that they have a tendency. So really the fight for civic space is not really about who are our allies, but really focusing on the real issue that you are fighting for, and really being able to determine which actor is contributing positively towards enabling the civic space, but also understanding also which actor is really contributing to civic space, and it's not very automatic that since it is your government or the other government for you. So, and this is the point that I think Alexander was making, that we as civil society still have to really remain in solidarity, like the lady that spoke, that really fight for the civic space in the context of human rights, like you were saying, because it is a human rights, is the right to assemble, the right to protest. All these must be part and parcel of the debate. But again, recognizing that as civil society, we have the right to self-initiative, and that means that we are independent actors, and we have to be able to recognize that and defend that among any of those stakeholders, whether government, private sector, whichever, to secure that, I think. Ladies and gentlemen, give Major a big clap and give yourselves another big clap. We are going to end the session here. Thank you very much, everyone. There is lunch at the back. Bon appetit. And I have to grab you by the hand and try to.
Absolutely. Oh, good luck with your final. I hope
Thank you so much. Nice to be here.